AI has only changed the speed of execution. It has changed nothing else. When I think about my go-to-market, I need to do the same as always. Who's the customer? What's their problem? What am I going to say to them that is relevant? And why they're going to pay attention to me versus somebody else. And those things, they haven't changed. You actually need to think a lot harder in your own brain, not an AI brain, how you can cut through to them. And so instead of, I can connect all the workflows and I can put all the skill MD files into all my agents and get them to do stuff. But really, people are only going to pay attention if it's relevant and if you stand out from the crowd. So what we've started to do is
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Evergrow Show, and our guest today is a 2-time founder and 3-time CMO who has experienced the full spectrum of growth from leading high-stakes go-to-market strategy at Microsoft and Nokia to advising high-growth ventures worldwide while building the playbooks that power billion-dollar outcomes. Please welcome the master of hyper-targeted growth and standardized scaling, Kat Wendelstad.
Wow, what an intro. Nice to be here.
I mean, the reputation precedes it. So I had to cover everything. But Kat, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and chat with us. I'm really excited to get into the conversation. And I'd love to kick it off with a pretty simple question of what are some of the things that you're most excited about right now?
Most excited about deploying more AI at work. I know that everybody's talking about it and how to do it, but just seeing how quickly things change is just mind blowing. A year ago, I was studying really painful workflows and trying to make tools like N8N work for me and like piecing together bits and pieces. And I'm not a super technical person, so learning about webhooks and fast forward 12 months and you just basically speak into your computer and it builds dashboards. It's absolutely wild. So I'm super excited about that. And and basically growing the company that I'm currently with. Those are my two focuses.
Yeah, great focuses to have. And it's so funny. I feel like for the last, 2 years or so, I've gone from, no AI usage at all, and very early to ChatGPT and using it as kind of like my, place to bounce ideas, to then diving into N8N and trying to piece it all together and writing code and, just going through like the heavy technical setup and then having to reinvent my stack every few months as soon as there's any sort of like, feature upgrade or new platform, like, all right, I guess I'm scrapping all of this. But it's interesting too, because I don't feel like it was so much a waste of time as it was priming my technical knowledge and sort of foundational understanding for how these things work and getting a chance to deep dive into the back ends and really get these things configured gives me, at least I feel like gives me a much better understanding of, in a world where these things are much easier and simpler and quicker to build, gives me an understanding of like the fundamentals behind them. And so, no regrets, but it really is crazy how quickly things are evolving and just how much better and easier the technology's gotten.
Yeah, it's wild. And there's no wasted effort, especially if you come from a cold start like we all did a couple of years ago. It's just now everything's kind of consolidating. It's interesting how basically Claude has just sucked everything into its magnetic power system. That's what I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny to think of myself as, again, I'm also mostly non-technical. I used to, vibe code my MySpace page back in the day, but I've definitely gone a lot deeper into things, and I think it's even crazier how we kind of went from automation and sort of putting piping together for tools to speak with each other and pass data together to full-blown agentic stacks that actually do the work for you. And I think that's been the most mind-blowing part of the entire journey. Is very early on in the day, I was like, okay, it's really cool that it makes me more efficient, but now it's just nuts that it's actually doing the work for me. And I, kind of on that tangent, I would love to ask you about everybody's using AI. Everybody's got a instance of Claude, maybe even Claude Code, maybe even something agentic like Perplexity Computer. What are some of the most non-obvious or unique ways that you're using AI tools in your stack right now that are really having the biggest impact on, the bottom line?
So I've actually spent a lot of time in Perplexity Computer,
Mhm.
and it's kind of, when did it come out? 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks
Yeah.
ago? uh, and it's unbelievable how good it is. It's absolutely nuts. It's actually better at Claude, like hands down, on data visualization. So the challenge I currently have is we are starting to pipe in data from different sources. So we now have data on HubSpot, we have campaign data, we have, the sort of, we don't have full funnel data. We have data at different bits of the funnel. And so it's really hard. Like, as a non-technical person, I'm a team of 2 at the moment. How do I make stuff visible for the organization where I'm spending my time? And literally, with the worst prompts ever, it can build stuff that's just nuts. You don't need to be a prompt. Last year was all about prompt engineering. You just ask it to do one thing: build me a dashboard of my Google Analytics data, and you get it by week, segmented. It pulls out all the issues. It then gives you recommendations of what you should do next. It then goes into, if there's, I don't know, a technical SEO issues or backlinks, it goes into like full plan. So you can go from sort of, okay, here's my executive view, right down to, 90% workflow, where I'm like, okay, I don't actually need to do any of the heavy lifting anymore in terms of thinking how to execute this whole thing. So all I need to do is then, get somebody on the tools to go and fix my, I don't know, schema markup on my title tags or whatever. So it's done the whole thing from top to bottom, which Claude, I haven't figured out how Claude does that yet, or if it does it in the same way.
Yeah, it's also really interesting. I've spoken with probably at this point hundreds of people who are in various stages of AI implementation, or even naysayers, and it's always very funny to me how somebody uses a tool, they try to one-shot the prompt, it like doesn't get it perfectly right from the first shot, and they come back to me and they're like, "It's trash. It's never going to be able to do the thing I need it to do." And then like a week later, their entire job has been automated. And it's interesting to me, the reluctance to start embracing technology before it's perfect. And
Yeah.
I'm definitely guilty of that to some extent myself. Like, I'll never download the newest iPhone software update or something. I'll always wait some time. Same thing when like Mac comes out with a new OS. Like, I will give it some time because there's a chance that yes, it might break some workflows and there's probably some bugs and stuff. But yeah, like you said, I mean, even just diving into Perplexity Computer, this is the worst it will ever be. And just knowing that is crazy. It's completely mind-blowing to think about that the tech that is doing so much work for us is just at the beginning stages. It's, like trying to use the computer before Mark Andreessen invented Netscape. It's like trying to use any technology before the mass adoption curve, really took effect. And so yeah, I appreciate that you're, trying all these new tools and obviously balancing that with, your existing responsibilities and, the things that you actually need to deliver on a day to day to do your job well. And I feel like, at least for the best marketers and growth engineers, like, this is part of your job now. Like, yes, you have the stuff that you need to work on, you have goals to hit, but like, if you are not spending meaningful time just playing around with these tools and figuring out what they can do for you, it's going to be very, very hard to catch up by the time that everybody's got access to the easiest way to use the thing. You could build such a massive moat right now if you are just doubling down on experimentation and, just trying out everything new to see if it, holds up to your standards at the very least.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the reality or the challenge is, when does that time, how do you block that time off to go in? And because an hour a day, it's kind of not enough. You
Yeah.
have to, ideally, I kind of have to 2 days of tinkering, 2 days of working, but the reality isn't like that. So I think there's this constant tension with, where am I going to spend my time? Where's time going to be valuable on these new tools? What's going to be discarded in the future? And I think that is the tension, because of course with more tools come higher expectations, and because you can churn through so much work so much quicker, making also time for thinking time is absolutely crucial. So like having that balance between learning, doing, and thinking, or the other way around, learning, thinking, and doing, um, is a tricky one. It's a really tricky one.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like in general, like with growth and go to market and marketing, it's always been a game of prioritization. Like it's always been, there are a million fires that needed to get put out yesterday. There's only one me, or we only have a finite amount of resources. What's the most important fire? Like what's going to break down the structure? What's the biggest opportunity that I can take advantage of now? And I feel like, nowadays it's time is added into the prioritization, or is even more critical in that spectrum than ever before, because it's now execution, it's the strategic vision, but it's also this experimentation layer, which has always been super important. But I feel like now we don't even know what the possibilities are until we play around with it. And so like even knowing the landscape of possibilities, just becomes infinitely more deep with the more tools emerge, with like the model improvements, with all the features that are shipping on almost a daily basis from all like the big players in the LLM space. But I would love to ask you about, obviously you've had very extensive career. You've worked with so many different companies at so many different stages. You've seen different eras of marketing and go to market and its evolution. What have been some of your most memorable wins throughout your career? They could be recent, they could be in the past, but things that really stand out to you, like, wow, this was a major, major unlock for me.
Hmm. Love that question. Um, I think the biggest unlock in terms of career trajectory was when I left Microsoft. I'd been at Microsoft for a couple of years, and I had a big corporate career, so Nokia, as you mentioned, then Microsoft, and I went to join a startup. And at a relatively early stage, they had probably about 5 million in revenue, 70 million valuation. So it wasn't too tiny, but we grew that company into a category leader, kind of against all the odds, and in an emerging market in Brazil. And so that was extremely hard. And so when you do that, you kind of suddenly have a completely different track record, or sort of proof of value that you can go and sell to the market. So in a very short space of time, in about 18 months, we more than 3x revenue. We built Clinic. It was a clinic chain for the low and middle income population. We built that into the largest clinic provider in not only Brazil, but in Latin America. Started treating from maybe 50,000 patients to over 1 million patients. So it was just that hockey stick. And I got really lucky because I was able to get that job out of a corporate career. But that was, for my career, the biggest, definitely the biggest unlock. And we just basically wrote the playbook. We didn't know how it's gonna go. There was no playbook for such a thing. So we just had to make it up on the fly.
Yeah, and it's crazy. You almost never see that type of growth curve at larger companies. like, yes, you have incremental wins, and yes, you can launch a new product, and yes, you can see adoption across potentially a new vertical. Sure, like all of these things are possible, and maybe the stock price moves a bit, and 13% is really exciting. But I think it's only in the startup world that you really see that hockey stick, and you can go from, hundreds or thousands to hundreds of thousands or millions in users, revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like that's, a high that some people just can't stop riding, which is, it's why I've been in the startup world for 15 years at this point, specifically in emerging industries too. There's nothing more that I love than walking into a company pre-product market fit. Nobody's even sure if this thing is useful, and then just exiting it, 2, 3, 4 years later, boom, it's been acquired, or boom, there's an IPO. That's a crazy rush. And I think nobody that hasn't worked in startups will ever experience that. And so if that's something that you feel like is missing from your career, like, yes, please go do the startup thing. And I feel like it's even crazier now because back in the day, startups, like most other companies, proportionally had to scale headcount to grow the company, to grow revenue. And I feel like now you have these like solopreneur companies, or like, less than 10-person teams, and they're doing hundreds of million in ARR. And just a crazy time to be alive. But I would love to double click on one of the things you mentioned. So you've actually had this really interesting, experience where you've managed to grow businesses all over the world, not just kind of limited to one geo. What are some of the like most obvious or most interesting cultural differences that really stood out to you when working in different geographies that you probably wouldn't have expected before you got your boots on the ground?
That I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah.
So just for context, I've built companies in the UK, Brazil, and Bangladesh. So very different geographies.
Pretty radical spectrum there.
Pretty radical spectrum. So they say Brazil is not for beginners, and Bangladesh is infinitely harder than Brazil. So it's strictly professionals. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done. What did I not expect? I think that because that was so tough, I was remote. So I helped build a healthcare company into, again, it was the low cost clinic chain model adapted to the Bangladeshi population. And I was the CMO and chief growth officer, and I was remote. I was not in Bangladesh. So I didn't expect that you could grow a team as effectively as I did remotely. And the reason why I was able to do that, which is the surprising bit, I thought, these people have completely different culture, everything. What's the kind of one thing that unites us? And I thought humor. So we just started. It's a very hierarchical society and very formal. And so I kind of in with my team did away with formality. So it just completely opened up how they what they thought they were able to do. It increased velocity. It increased trust and confidence. And they're very, very funny people. And so suddenly they were able to sort of express themselves in a way that they hadn't before. And that kind of meant we became a tight team, even though we never met.
Wow. It's so funny. I never really thought about it before, but I've worked in French companies, Dutch companies, Latin American companies, Asian companies. I've worked in and with a lot of different companies, and I've never really thought about what was the uniting factor, or sort of like what was the thread that, connected everything, in the sense of like why those experiences were great and memorable. I think it almost always did come back to humor. It's always been like, how can we find this common language? How can we keep each other entertained? And, I think when the challenge is difficult, and when the goals are crazy, and when the work is hard on a day-to-day basis, I really do think humor is that thing that just keeps it all together. It's the glue that connects people and, unites everybody. So I love that observation. I really never thought about it that way. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Especially in England, they're so sarcastic. Like we can't can't live without it.
That is fair. Dry humor, especially. I'm a huge fan. Different people have different approaches and preferences, and I do think that like little subtle cultural humor that might go over a lot of people's heads. I feel like that's the stuff that really sticks with me. So definitely appreciate that. But I would love to kind of flip it around. And so I asked you about some of your most memorable wins. I would love to ask you about what are some of your favorite failures throughout your career? So things that went wrong, but really taught you a lesson or was a massive learning experience for you. What are some of those for you?
I think in terms of career, when you joining a company is always a choice, and it's a difficult choice, especially when it's a startup, because you're joining an unknown entity essentially, and the earlier the company is, the less known the entity is, even if perhaps the founders have a good track record, but more often than not, they're first time founders. So how do you pick well, or how do you sort of avoid the red flags? And one of the things that over time I've learned to be a red flag is if they are hyperbolic about the future potential of the potential and the organization. So I remember one company presenting me with a financial model. They'd raised a lot of money at this point. So they'd raised a 9-figure sum. And I joined them, or I was in the conversation with joining them, and they showed me they were pre-revenue, so they'd raised a lot of money on research. They had done, maybe 50,000 in revenue, and their financial model was 50,000 in year one, 5 million in year two, and $1 billion, I'm not joking, in year three. And I thought, they've got a very good technology and they've got a very strong team, but that is complete insanity. That will just, it just won't happen. There's absolutely no way this can ever happen. And so it should have been a red flag in terms of culture and how they thought about themselves in terms of what they're able to do. I think ambition is great and ambition is super important, but that was just nuts and completely crazy. And so and I've been in that situation before, when you're when they're trying to get you in and they kind of do the calculation of what your shares are going to be worth. Basically your shares are going to be worthless and you might get lucky. That's how you should think about it. You shouldn't join because there's some crazy calculation on a piece of paper that most likely isn't going to materialize.
That is such a valuable lesson that I too have learned from experience. I probably for the last, 7, 8 years, I don't even look at their calculations of what the valuations of my shares will be worth. I just need to know that I have good sizable equity and that I believe in the company. But that future pricing of shares is a crazy, crazy sales tactic. Like that for me is the most obvious. Like if that is the strongest portion of their negotiation while you're discussing comp, just go away. We're all working hard. Yes, we all want skin in the game, but I'm working today and I'm working from my experiences and my gut instincts. And for you to tell me that we're going to go from 50,000 to $1 billion in a very short amount of time, like you got to show me the money. Like just make it, make sense, as I like to say. That is definitely a very, very good learning. I have kind of it's a pretty bold question, but given all of your years of experience and wisdom and, all the things that you've seen, if you had to distill down your core knowledge into just a few broad sentences, What would you say to a room full of founders that are looking to grow their companies? How would they approach it? What are some of the must-dos? What are some of the never-dos? And obviously, it's a very broad question, very much so depends on the type of company, the type of, business model, but like, what are some of your first principles that you would always convey to founders?
I love that question. Such a fun question. I think the most important thing for any founder and any founding team is communication. That is the single most important principle, because without good communication about what you do, who you do it for, why somebody should trust you, why they should give you money, why somebody should buy your product, why should somebody go and work for you, it all boils down to communication and being clear and intentional around that. If you don't have that sorted, you cannot raise money, you cannot attract talent, and you can't get customers. And so just you need to keep it really simple and focus on the other person. It's never about you, it's always about them. And if you can keep that in mind, I think the companies will go far. I've worked with a lot of very technical founders, incredibly smart people, but not all of the very, very technical founders are great communicators. And so because of the depth of knowledge they have in their field, sometimes they can fall down in terms of transmitting that. And that then sort of, makes everything else harder. However, if you are a very technical founder and a great communicator, it's almost unbeatable.
That is definitely a big takeaway for sure. And I feel like even, in my day-to-day, I've definitely made the transition from using complex language, and I feel like it was being done, almost inadvertently as a way of gatekeeping, as a way of, I'm very important and I work on complex things, and it's been done across every industry. Finance is notoriously bad at it. Like, if you just look at the way that they talk about financial instruments and how everything is orchestrated, the layperson will hear a conversation and just think, nope, like, not for me. But I've actually found that as humanity has evolved, people that tend to overcomplicate things tend to actually be viewed less authoritatively, because people just don't have the attention spans nor the desire to like go and try to distill super, super complex things in their own head. Like, people love when information is accessible, and, we're already skimming versus reading. So I would rather skim something that I understand versus trying to go back several times and reread something that's just like it's just not making sense to me. So I do think clear communication and trying to distill things into the simplest possible terminology in a way to make information accessible and understandable, super, super underrated skill across the board at every department in the organization, whether it be marketing or, tech or even finance. Like, communication is just such an important foundational crux for everybody.
Yeah,
I love
100%.
that. Another interesting question. I keep throwing him like curveballs
Go.
at you. You've been doing a great job. I guess so. So you are currently overseeing marketing and growth for an AI organization in the era of AI. How is your growth and go-to-market strategy, tactics, tools, how are they different from everything you've experienced before? And what are some similarities that you're seeing? And again, like first principles that are just holding true regardless of the industry, regardless of the trend, in your current position right now?
I actually think AI has only changed the speed of execution. It has changed nothing else. So the challenge that we have, I work for a company called Electric Twin, and we build synthetic audiences. It's essentially an always-on customer audience that you can interrogate about anything. That response is accurate as a real customer would. Now, that's an emerging category in emerging technology. And the difficulty about that is you need to educate, you need to find people who are willing to trust that it's accurate, and then you need to find the people that are willing to test it and spend a lot of money on it. We're enterprise grade. Now, when I think about my go-to-market, I need to do the same as always. Who's the customer? What's their problem? What am I going to say to them that is relevant, and why they're going to pay attention to me versus somebody else? And those things, they haven't changed. You actually need to think a lot harder in your own brain, not an AI brain, how you can cut through to them. And so instead of, I can connect all the workflows and I can put all the skill MD files into all my agent and get them to do stuff. But really, people are only going to pay attention if it's relevant and if you stand out from the crowd. So what we've started to do is to build a creative-led strategy that is led through visuals, that is led through storytelling, that is led through a certain amount of humor and attitude, rather than the average. And so we've had to raise the bar in that sense. And then AI just does the sort of execution layer and testing through variants of ads or whatever. But the higher level thinking has gotten harder, and that I don't think AI is there in terms of bringing the taste.
Yeah, no, for sure. Two things that immediately come to mind. Recently on X, formerly known as Twitter, somebody released this like AI CMO product, and everybody went nuts. Everybody's retweeting it. Just fire your marketing team. Blah 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 blah. And then you see the real evaluation by folks that have been in the growth and marketing trenches for the last decade or two, and they're like, amazing. I love this actually, because every company is now going to standardize their marketing and go to market with the same horse shit as everybody else. And it's just an easy target for me to just stand out and be unique and be creative and leverage my humanity. So I love that piece. And I think the other thing that's just so interesting to me, and I've seen marketing, again, I wasn't around in the 60s, 70s, but it's almost this like super creative copywriting era where, you had just a few channels and like they were all very, very high barrier to entry. Getting a, front page article or ad in the newspaper or running an ad on TV, you had to be super, super creative and memorable and really put every ounce of effort into your copy and the one visual you can feature. And it's just, that type of campaign. And then we evolved into this like massive distribution direct response era, right? Where like it's, creative at scale. There's 100 channels. There's a million permutations of all the things that you can possibly do. And all of this is running into Excel sheets, and your marketing performance is purely graded on the ROI or the ROAS of all of your channels. And we kind of like got niched down into that for a bit. And I get it, it's just the way that the tools enabled us to finally put a number on the ROI of marketing and do it accurately and, really judge it for what it was doing to the bottom line directly. But I feel like now there's almost kind of this reverse shift, and you could see it both in terms of like the types of marketing that is winning right now, and also the job market for marketers and growth folks really, really indexing super heavily on creative strategy, on storytelling, on humanity, on all of these things that are very, very reminiscent, at least to me, of like what marketing was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so I feel like there's this interesting bell curve. I'm sure you've seen the meme of like, this is the individual that doesn't know anything and they have a thought. This is the individual that kind of knows stuff and they have a different thought. And then this is the expert individual who's had decades of experience and they have the same thought as the people in the very beginning of the bell curve. Like, it's just, you always come back to, I don't really know much, but let's have fun and play around and figure it out and be creative while we're at it. And I feel like, at least for me, I love that we seem to be moving back in that direction, because that's always where I've thrived personally. Like, yes, I do the data and I run growth experimentation. It's all measurement and spreadsheets and numbers and statistical significance. But at the end of the day, I love the creativity. That's really why I wake up and go to work in the morning. And it seems like very much so, at least from your perspective as well, seems to be coming back around to that style of marketing.
100%. And I think the people that are going to do well, they're going to do, extremely well, especially in B2B SaaS. There's an ad. Somebody asked me what's an ad I had in my that kind of cut through recently, and in London they had Ricky Gervais, from The Office, and they had him with a bunch of whiskey bottles, and the first ad was it was only in the tube, only in the underground,
Yeah.
and it said, "Soon you'll be 6 feet under too," or "Soon you'll be 6 feet under." And it was just brilliant, or like,
Yeah.
"Hello, London, watch out for your phone," because there's so much pickpocketing.
Yep.
And it just hit a nerve. And it was funny. There was a controversy around it, so you got extra press. That's how you get people to remember your product.
Absolutely. It's morbid, it's ridiculous, it really makes you think, it breaks that fourth wall, and then people care. Like, people take pictures of it. You get the billions of impressions that you couldn't have possibly paid for just by making it engaging and making it interesting for people to interact with. Yeah, I love that. And I personally look forward to seeing more companies that have always been on the more polished side of things really leaning further into, humanity and into personifying the brand in a way that I think relates to people. So I guess kind of on that same tangent, where do you see growth in go-to-market and marketing evolving in the next 1 to 3 years? I refuse to talk about 5 years from now because that's just ludicrous, but the next 1 to 3 years, we're in this AI era. We're clearly seeing some level of transformation. How do you think that impacts us moving forward for the foreseeable future?
I mean, when we think about the last 12 months, we spoke about how many different tools we tried and we sort of discarded quite a few. And now things are sort of going to be built on top of a few of the main players like Claude. So I think there's going to be integration and consolidation. And I think with that sort of the level of efficiency is going to be incredible. But I think in terms of the ways of working, we're going to spend more time in conversations and more time with customers, trying to understand what matters to them, how to make their job better. And then AI will handle more of the sort of mundane execution. It's going to give me my Monday briefing. I just go click, yeah, send these 15 emails. Yeah, send me this report. It's going to do the sort of the mundane thinking for us. But I think we're going to lean into the human relationships much more. And I saw something interesting from JP Morgan yesterday in terms of a briefing. They showed a long curve of sort of historical or technological disruption.
Mhm.
And so you have productivity gains through the introduction of technology. Then lots of people lose their jobs and they're not getting created. And once that has embedded, there's more jobs. And there's a lot of people that obviously Dario Amodei, he went on press and said, all these jobs are getting killed. That is true on the one hand, and I also see that. On the other hand, when you look at the jobs, the job openings for software engineers in the US, they went down in the last 6 months. They're again on the up. Why is that? With better tools. Now, people are building more. There is more demand. It's just a slightly different skill set. And so I'm actually quite hopeful, and I want to be hopeful. I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm a mom. I've got kids, and I hope that it's going to usher in an era of more and better conversations, more and better creativity, and more builders. We're going to go from a minimum viable product to a minimum viable business, and more people are going to be building and trying things. And I think it's going to be a good thing because it's going to level the playing field.
I love that. And whenever I'm laying in bed, awake at night, obviously mulling over are we doomed? Is AI taking our jobs? What's going to happen to civilization and humanity? I like to comfort myself by thinking back to the coal miners back in the day would never, ever, ever be able to imagine that there would be people in Miami with broccoli haircuts selling courses on Instagram. And like, to think that just because this line of work that has been so standardized across society and these are the only opportunities available to us, we don't know what lies ahead. We have no idea what the possibilities are. And I do like to think about it as possibilities rather than closing the chapter on office work or knowledge work or something like that. So I love your sentiment, and I do have high hopes for the future of humanity. And it's either that or universal basic income. Either is fine.
Which is, I mean, I'm very against universal basic income because it takes away people's dignity.
Yes.
But I think the way to think about it is optionality. You know, the reason why I left Microsoft in a corporate career was, it's going to sound really harsh, but I actually didn't know anything apart from how Microsoft worked. And so when I show up to work and then when I show up to another company, they go, "What have you done?" And it's like, "Okay, well, I know this process and that process." Well, you're not actually doing anything. You're not actually producing anything. And so I think we're all going to have to be producers. And so even people in very strategic roles, higher up in big corporation, need to be doing stuff and building stuff in order to stay relevant. And so I think, in order to stay, also have options. If you lose your job, and that kind of a job, getting a new one is not easy. And so you want to have more skills rather than just knowing the processes and ins and outs of your business.
Absolutely. Always be leveling up. It's something I think about a lot. And, it's that famous trope of don't spend 2 hours watching Netflix, try to learn XYZ or watch this video on this new tool. And, as much of a trope as it is, I do think about like where my time goes on a daily basis, outside of like specific work tasks. And I'm like, yeah, I could optimize. I could definitely be better and do better. But then always, it's that balance too. You can't burn yourself out, because if I don't sleep for the next 2 weeks learning every single new AI tool, I'm not using any of this stuff. I'm sleeping for 5 days straight. So, definitely a balance there. Well, Kat, if people want to follow your journey and the work that you're doing now and see more of your content, where should they look?
LinkedIn's the best place. It's my number one channel, my only channel. I have a Substack, but it's been neglected in favor of LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn.
All right, great. Well, I will link the LinkedIn in the show notes. And Kat, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like you've brought a very wise, level-headed perspective to things where, if you go on X, you go on LinkedIn, everybody's shouting from the rooftops that we're doomed. I feel like this conversation was actually very reassuring, and it made me personally look forward to the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. Really good fun.